Canvas before Monday. And let's get on to chapter 8 here. So for chapter 8, I've kind of cut this down quite a bit because I feel like plant chemistry can get quite a bit out of control there. So let's see if I can make this bigger here. Nope. Sorry, my computer, having computer problems here. You guys see that on the screen?
Yep.
All right. So in plant chemistry and metabolism, I feel like it gets pretty complicated, and in the book they devote a lot of attention to this plant chemistry aspect, and I just trying to outline what I think is the most important for practical purposes. So really paring it down here, and we're going to start off with plant metabolism. So metabolism is just the variety of processes involved in just an organism's life cycle, and metabolites are the molecules that are involved in that process. So they are the actual molecules, the actual chemicals that are making up the plant, the different plant parts, and those that are involved in all the different processes for the life cycle of the plant. And these metabolites are basically the basis of most plant nutritional needs, because nitrogen, for instance, the nutrient that is in the greatest need, is involved in a variety of these processes, including in the production of chlorophyll. So if the metabolite requires the atom in the molecule, then we're going to need to supply it in some form of plant nutrition. So we get the creation of these metabolites and the energy that we need through photosynthesis. So all plants are carbohydrate-rich organisms, and we think of carbohydrates as the energy, pretty much the energy source of the plant. They depend on this form of carbohydrate for plant structure, cellular structure, and the storage and transfer of energy. So the general composition of carbohydrates is just what the name implies. Carbo is carbon, hydrate is water. So the general formula for carbohydrates is carbon with a water. One carbon atom, one water molecule. But as we know, that's just kind of the general basis. It gets much more complicated than that. So we actually classify these into different structural groups, and that's how they're bonded together. On A, we have an aldehyde group here, which is this double bond of oxygen to carbon with a hydrogen on the side. And then a keto group, which is a double bond of oxygen just to carbon and is free to bond to other forms. So just the chemical structure of these things, how they're bonded to and are able to make other molecules. So the structural groups of these carbohydrates start off with the monosaccharides, mono being one single carbohydrate molecule, and those are the aldoses and ketoses. Then we have the disaccharides, which are two carbohydrate molecules linked together. The oligosaccharides, which are more than two but less than seven linked together. The polysaccharides, which are combinations of 7 or more molecules linked together. And think of saccharide as sugar, pretty much. So glucose is the most common and most important of really all of the sugars, all of the carbohydrates that we use, because it makes the basis for all the different metabolites, basically. It's the basic unit. And these are just the different structural forms of glucose, and they appear in different ring or planar structures. And really the difference of this structure just allows them to bond to things differently and to make different molecules. So if glucose exists in a solution, the structural forms all exist in equilibrium. So they're basically kind of existing at alpha glucose here on the left and beta glucose on the right, as well as the planar form in the middle, and kind of all at the same time. So they're fluctuating in a solution in water, basically, as they move through the plant in these forms. We have the carbon atoms here that are numbered in this case to help us keep track of these different structures. The vertical lines here represent the ring structures and the hydroxyl groups that they are bonded to. So that position of those hydroxyl groups is important in determining the structure and the chemical properties of those carbohydrates. And they can differ in the position of that hydroxyl group only at that first carbon. We use the Greek letters of alpha and beta to indicate the position of where that hydroxyl group is at that first carbon. So the ring structures are the molecular form involved in metabolism. Therefore, it is important to understand their structure and their diversity. If the position of one of these hydroxyl groups bonded is changed, then the compound is changed. It's got different chemical properties and it has different functions. So this becomes very important because these different molecules here that we're looking at, alpha ribose and 2-deoxyribose, are the important components of the nucleic acids DNA and RNA, which are used basically to code the genetics of the plant. We got polyols, amines, and uronic acids. They're also important in plant structure and metabolism. Again, these are just different chemicals that are involved in the different structures of metabolites, the precursors to make the different chemicals. So carbohydrates, we're going to look at the difference of whether it's a starch or a cellulose. And right here we have the general structure of a starch. And when we're looking at this 1 to 4 notation, this is the linkage between the two glucose molecules from carbon 1 to carbon 4 on the next molecule, how they're linked together. The alpha notation showing that the hydroxyl group here is grouped at that position 1 of this ring structure coming down. And I don't think it's really important to memorize what the structure is. Just note the different structures are able to create the different, whether it's a starch or a cellulose. And it only requires one simple change in the structure at that first carbon, whether it is a starch or a cellulose. So if it's going down alpha glucose, then we've got a starch. If it's going up beta glucose, we've got cellulose. And the chemical nature of these two molecules, even though it only differs in just the way that it's bonded together, is actually very different. So starch is slightly water soluble, can be broken down by various organisms to that simple glucose molecule. So it becomes very important for nutrition. for anything that eats the plants, basically. You know, we eat it, we're breaking that starch down into the simple sugars that we use for our own metabolism. Cellulose, on the other hand, is pretty much insoluble in water and is assembled into these fibril structures that provide the rigidity required for cell walls in the plant. And because of that, we cannot actually digest cellulose. It comes out as waste. So another common carbohydrate is sucrose, and this is the most common form of carbohydrate used in carbon transport in plants. It is a disaccharide, so two sugars comprised of a glucose and a fructose molecule. And sucrose is also, it's the same as table sugar. Where do we get it? In tropical parts of the world, we obtain it from sugar cane. In temperate parts of the world, we now get it from sugar beets. So table sugar, you know, is very important. It's kind of the most digestible form, sucrose, to humans. Very simple sugar, simple carbohydrate. All right, let's take a look at the lipids. So lipids are fats, basically, fatty acids. They are compounds that are derivative of glycerol, which is just a simple 3-carbon molecule. And lipids are very important in cell membrane structure, but they're also important for energy storage, especially in seeds. Thing with fats and fatty acids and lipids are that they are hydrophobic. So they repel water, they're not soluble in water. However, they are soluble in other fats. So both plants and animals have a wide variety of fatty acids, and this is just the general structure of a fatty acid. When we see this subscript N here after the parentheses of this CH2 molecule, that group is just present in this a certain number of times. So N is just basically how many times that molecule is present. And depending on the fatty acid, which fatty acid it is, it corresponds to that number of N. So lauric acid, we've got 10 of these CH2s. Palmitic acid has 14. Stearic acid has 16. And fatty acids can either be saturated or unsaturated. You guys have probably heard that in terms of human diets, right? Saturated fats being more difficult to break down, and thus, you know, contribute more to obesity, for instance. Unsaturated fats are easier to break down. So oleic acid is an example of an unsaturated fatty acid in plants. And fatty acids are very structurally very complex molecules. And to complete the structure, they're linked together to glycerol molecules to create a triglyceride. So we get materials such as fats, waxes, and oils, each that have different physical properties belonging to this class of compounds. These basically long chains of these complex CH2 molecules. We also have membrane lipids that are called phospholipids because they are linked to a phosphate group. Here we have the phosphate group right here instead of a fatty acid. So there's the phosphorus in the middle linked to oxygen and hydroxide, creating a phosphate group. So this phospholipid molecule here is 2 of these fatty acids right here, attached to a phosphate group. which is then attached to another chemical group. So a wide variety of chemical groups can be attached to that phosphate, coupled with different fatty acids, meaning a variety of phospholipid structural and chemical properties is out there. It's there's a ton of different phospholipid with different chemical properties, different structural properties. So the phosphate and other attached group are charged and they are hydrophilic, which means they're water loving and they are water soluble. The long hydrocarbon, which is basically hydrogen, carbon, oxygen chained together on the fatty acids, are hydrophobic. So one breaks down in water, the other doesn't. Right here we have a single layer of lipid molecules arranged in a double layer due to this mutual attraction among the hydrophobic hydrocarbon chains. And this bilayer arrangement gives the basic structure of the membrane of the plant that basically is involved in moving nutrients throughout from one cell to the other. So that's one of the reasons that fats are important. It's because it creates this structural membrane that allows the movement of these nutrients and all of the metabolites. The type of the fatty acids that are found in that membrane affect the ability of the plants to withstand cool temperatures. So those plants that have evolved in cold or temperate climates have more of the unsaturated fatty acids in their membranes. The saturated fatty acids will start to solidify in cool temperatures. And that is why we actually have tropical and subtropical plants that suffer chilling injury, potentially at temperatures well above freezing, even around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The difference in the saturated versus the unsaturated fatty acids in the plants also is important in the types of oils that they are able to provide for human nutrition. So sterol, another fatty acid, when it is inserted into the membrane, it increases the stability of that membrane structure. And the sterol, some content of some plant membranes can reach up to 50%. So we have cytosterol, which is the most common sterol in plant membranes and is closely related to cholesterol, the main sterol in animal membranes. Cholesterol is not found at all in plants, but is commonly found in animals. It has a very similar structure to cytosterol and is the most abundant sterol in plants. Proteins, as we know, are very important for human nutrition. I mean, all of these are important: carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. But proteins are important because they are these long chains of the linked amino acids that together are going to create these complex three-dimensional molecules. They can be structural. They can serve as storage units for particular nutrients such as nitrogen, or they can also act as enzymes and catalysts that are used in the plant to direct biochemical reactions. All amino acids have a common structure that consists of these simple elements: nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. However, they differ by the way that these chemical groups are attached to the common structure to actually develop into the amino acid. Amino acids are synthesized when ammonium is combined with a carbon compound to create glutamate. And this is a process called transamination. And this is just, here we have ammonium molecule right here, NH4, being taken in and then reduced nitrogen is being fixated. We've got the photorespiration from photosynthesis, and then that moves into this glutamine synthesization here, where it becomes part of this complex cycle where it's creating the other nucleic acids and proteins. They're important for really directing how the plant incorporates these biologically important compounds. There are 20 different amino acids found in proteins, and they are arranged in a very precise order to give each protein its special characteristic and function. There are 20 different ones. However, there are only 8 that are essential amino acids, and these are important to know. Methionine, valine, leucine, isoleucine, threonine, phenylalanine, tryptophan, and lysine. And if you remember, when we're talking about human nutrition, methionine and lysine are those that are complementary in the grain and legume combinations. Again, that's why it's important to have that combination in agricultural civilizations and in diets of humans, because one lacks, the legumes lack methionine, the grains lack lysine. Together, they provide the complete 8 essential amino acids with which we are able to build proteins. Again, these are the most important ones because they are essential to plant life and animal life. However, there are a lot of other amino acids that might not be essential to life, not essential in the metabolism of plants and animals, but are important for different functions. For instance, asparagine, they say, is really good for creating the molecules in your eyes. So it's very important for eyesight. So although it's not important for life, these other amino acids, these other 12, are very important yet. The precise sequence of the amino acids in the proteins is determined by the makeup of the DNA of the genes. So the way that the DNA is translated basically is creating the different sequence of the amino acids, coding different proteins, making the different makeup of the different cells, tissues, and organs in plants as well as animals, in all life, basically. The essential amino acids cannot be synthesized by animals. We are unable to create them on their own. We can only obtain them from plant proteins, either directly from eating the protein from the plant or through the consumption of other animals that have eaten that protein. And they say in human nutrition, we're actually looking more at how these amino acids are, basically we eat proteins, we break them down into the amino acids to build more proteins. Some nutritionists are suggesting that might be better for our bodies and for our metabolism, more efficient if we're actually just consuming the amino acids directly and using them to build proteins. Because if you think about it, if we're breaking down proteins into amino acids, the other important antioxidants and vitamins they're not as available if we're busy breaking down the proteins. If we're building the proteins with those vitamins and antioxidants at the same time, it's just they might be more available. And this is just basically suggesting that we need to have more plants in our diet. So proteins are very important in all parts of the plant and in the coating of the different plant tissues, but become very important in seeds. And thinking back again to that human nutrition, we get most of our energy from plants either through seeds or through roots. That's where the plants are storing most of the energy. And so seeds contain various storage protein structures, and proteins actually make up between 5 and 25% of the dry weight of seeds. Those seeds that contain high levels of protein serve as the sources of protein for animal feeds and for human diets. So peanuts, soybeans, really, I mean, most nuts are sources of these proteins. Most legumes are examples of these really high protein seeds. And that's why we're growing them and feeding them to animals as well. The balance of the essential amino acids, again, which the animals cannot synthesize, is critical for the nutritional value of plants. In all plants, nitrogen is needed for proteins, and that is the nutrient that is taken up by the roots and utilized in the plants in the largest quantities. And nitrogen is very mobile in the different forms that it exists as, ammonium and nitrate most commonly in the soil. Therefore, because it's so mobile, it is often deficient in soils and must be supplied by some sort of either fertilization or cover cropping. It generally does not exist. And if we were sending our soil samples off to the testing laboratory at Virginia Tech, for instance, they don't even look at the nitrogen. They're not even going to tell you, because by the time you get the test results back, it's going to have changed. So it's just assumed that you need to fertilize with nitrogen. So nucleotides, and nucleic acids are these very important proteins that contain nitrogen in an organic base. These organic bases are extremely important in the metabolism, both of plants and animals, and they are derivatives of compounds known as purines and pyrimidines. On the left here, we have a purine molecule. On the right, we've got an adenine, which is a 6-amino purine. Here we have a pyrimidine and a cytosine, just different molecular structures. Again, I don't think it's important to memorize them. Just note that the different structures have different properties and are able to be bonded to chemicals differently. So we come to adenosine triphosphate, which is ATP, which is one of the most important molecules in all of metabolism, both in plants and in animals, just in the metabolism of cells, basically. And that's due to the energy that is stored and in the bonding of ATP of the adenosine, this nucleoside, to the triphosphate molecule over here. So when this molecule is broken, this triphosphate bond will yield basically energy in the form of calories. And this released energy provides the energy for other biochemical reactions. So ATP is basically the carrier of energy throughout the cell and moves it from the different organelles within the cell and throughout the different tissues and organs in the plant. Because ATP is very mobile and moves readily to participate in this variety of enzymatic reactions. So an important role of the organic bases is their function in the nucleic acids. So RNA is one of these nucleic acids, ribonucleic acid. Here it is on the left, and it has this chain-like structure linking to the different bases, the different organic bases. and it has the ribose molecule here connected to a phosphate molecule, connecting to another ribose, connecting to another phosphate, and so on and so forth, creating this chain. And RNA is extremely important as a nucleic acid because it is involved in the translation of the different of DNA. So in DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, we have one of 4 organic bases attached to each ribose molecule at that first carbon location. And these 4 organic bases are the A, G, T, and C, as you may remember from biology classes: adenine, guanine, thymidine, and cytosine. The long chain DNA molecules together make up chromosomes in the nucleus, which we think of as the brain of the cell, which carries that genetic information, which is used to create the proteins to build and maintain the organism itself. We also have secondary products, these different compounds that are not part of the main processes of metabolism in plants. Animals are not actually synthesizing these compounds. We're obtaining them from plants. And humans have actually exploited some of these chemicals in a wide variety of uses, often for medicine or in some cases even for recreational drugs. Cannabidiols, for instance, which are produced inside of animals and in several species of plants, including THC and CBD. These are just molecules that are, found, for instance, in the cannabis family of plants there, and have become important lately, even in Virginia here, the CBD for its medicinal uses. Think of the THC as being part of the recreational use of the drug, but they're also looking at it as for potential medicinal uses as well. And on this note, the book kind of goes into the recreational uses and creating these drugs from plants. I just want to note here that the difference in a toxin, a poison, and a medicine is the dose, right? So depending on, any compound, any material out there, if you consume too much of it, it becomes a poison. Just the right amount, it can be used as a medicine. So another one that very important in the news today and in is morphine, an opioid, right? Which is an alkaloid, which is extracted from the opium poppy, coming initially from this plant, Papaver somniferum, which is long used as a painkiller, but as we know, can lead to addiction and has kind of been a scourge on our country, especially here in our area in Appalachia. Really, morphine is the synthesized form, but of the opiate that is derived from the opium poppy. Extremely addictive, and again, used in small quantities, important as a painkiller, medicine. Used and abused in large quantities leads to addiction and becomes a poison. And we have lots of overdoses in our country from it. Cocaine is produced from the coca plant, which is native to the Andes Mountains of South America, which is relatively harmless in small doses. In fact, in South America, they use it as medicine. They make a tea from the coca leaves or chew on the coca leaves as a a numbing agent or as a way to reduce altitude sickness. But of course, when it's concentrated and purified into the drug cocaine, it becomes strongly addictive and very dangerous. Nicotine, another alkaloid coming from tobacco, Nicotiana tabacum, is toxic, again, when consumed in large quantities, and it can constrict the blood vessels. However, it has some good uses as well. I mean, nicotine is also used as a pesticide. And while it's mostly used recreationally, I don't know, are there any medicinal uses of tobacco? Not that I know of right off. Caffeine. Obtained from a few different plants, but probably most popularly from Coffea arabica, the coffee plant. Also tea. It acts as a stimulant. Again, but it is also addictive. All these alkaloids here that we're looking at, it's funny to note that used as in small quantities as a potential as a medicine or a stimulant, large quantities becomes toxic, becomes a poison. The important thing to note here, though, is that these are all used for cash crops, basically. Very important cash crops. I mean, nicotine, tobacco was in Virginia the #1 cash crop for many years. And South America, excuse me, cocaine, very important cash crop. The coca plant and the synthesization, excuse me, of cocaine from that plant. That's how these people get a lot of money. Same with, in the Middle East, we're growing opium poppies to derive the opiates from to produce these medicines. Caffeine in Africa and parts of South America, very important economically. So while these are not crucial to human nutrition or the metabolism of plants or animals, they do become important crops for economic reasons. Most of these alkaloids are formed rapidly in the plant naturally as a way to protect the plant. So the plant is forming them to protect them. Humans have learned to kind of exploit these alkaloids. So for instance, when a plant is attacked by an herbivore, such as a chewing insect, or grazed on by animals, they will utilize these alkaloids as these compounds to try to make it less palatable to that organism, to try to deter it. THC in the cannabis plant is used as a way to protect it from cold weather, from frost. So again, these environmental cues are why the plants are developing these alkaloids. I should also mention that there are many other alkaloids that, let me just go back here, many other alkaloids that plants produce that are toxic or poisonous to humans or other animals that we are not using as medicine or for recreation. Just want to highlight those that have become very important cash crops. All right, the phenolics are another secondary product that the plant is producing. The most important phenolic in plants is lignin, and it is the most abundant compound in plants after cellulose. Cellulose, because it is so important in creating cell walls. Again, remember, it's indigestible to humans. Lignin is deposited in many of the cell walls as well, especially in woody plants, to provide rigidity, strength, and structure to those plants. The other important class of phenolics are the flavonoids, which we usually see as acting as pigments in flowers. And for the plants, that's using it as a way to attract insects and birds. And we're also finding that these flavonoids are becoming important for people as well, as, you know, somewhat nutritional. I mean, again, kind of like not important in metabolism of humans, but important in particular things like eyesight or melatonin production. So flowers produce flavonoid pigments, though, that absorb UV light. So here we're looking at two photographs of a flower. The one on the left is basically what we would see, you know, with the naked eye. The one on the right is using a different light source, and it's revealing ultraviolet light. So that's what it looks like to like honeybees, for instance. So the plants are using them as a way to attract the pollinators. Then we also have terpenoids, which is the largest of all classes of secondary metabolites. And these are polymers of the hydrocarbon isoprene, which is here, the structure of it is here. And the terpenoids are often involved in the different odors and flavors. But again, they're finding that some of these terpenoids can be used for medicinal purposes and have different medicinal uses. The most important of the terpenoids are the carotenoids, which create the yellow pigment in leaves, and beta carotene, for instance, in carrots. Again, keep going back to eyesight, but they found that beta carotene is very important for vision. These pigments serve as a protective role in the chloroplast, but don't have any further use in senescing leaves, other than that they're leading to that true color, the yellow leaf colors in autumn we're starting to see now. Other terpenoids are going to exude from insect-damaged trees and other plants and appear to play a protective role against insect invasion. The terpenoid that we use the most in terms of an industrial context is rubber. And again, you know, you injure the plant or the rubber plant, and it, you know, exudes this terpenoid that then we use in many different industrial contexts. Many terpenoids, though, are poisonous to insects and are used as deterrents from the insects feeding. And that's it for chapter 8 there. So I know that's a lot, and try to go a little slow on that. I really cut a whole lot of that out on chapter 8, just because I think that, I mean, the plant chemistry is important to know about, you know, how it works. But I don't think you guys have to memorize the specific structure of molecules. Just know what molecules exist in plants and how they're used in the metabolism of plants. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns about that? When we get into more of the genetics, we just kind of touched on the DNA and RNA. We'll talk more about those chemicals, which are extremely important in plant chemistry. Yeah. Well, so anyway, any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right. Well, I reckon I'll let you guys go. And again, just remember to get on Canvas and finish that midterm exam. And also that soil lab, that part 1 is was due today. So by midnight today, if you get that soil lab in, that's the jar test. And then I'll put up the second part of that lab using the soil survey.
What's the deadline for completing the test?
What's that?
Oh, what's the deadline for them completing the test?
Well, completing the test is also tonight at 11:59 p.m.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to make sure they did.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Okay. Well, have a good one and see you Monday, and stay dry in the meantime.